Chapter 3. After the marriage ceremony, the guests were formally invited to the grand brunch banquet at the Whitemore City mansion. The king had already extended his congratulations within the chapel itself and, as expected, would not be attending the celebration that followed. His absence was deliberate, ceremonial duties fulfilled, political acknowledgement granted. The rest, however, was left to spectacle. Elias and Adrian departed together in the same carriage, the royal escort trailing behind them at a respectful distance. Once inside, the door shut with a muted thud, sealing them into a private space that felt anything but intimate. Neither of them spoke. The carriage rolled forward, wheels grinding softly against cobblestone, the rhythmic motion rocking them in quiet tension. Adrian sat across from him, posture straight, expression unreadable. His gloves rested neatly over clasped hands, his gaze fixed ahead, thoughtful, guarded, or perhaps simply distant. The silence stretched. It grew long enough to feel heavy, long enough to wrap around Elias like invisible chains tightening around his chest. He knew he was overwhelmed. Anyone would be after such a ceremony, such scrutiny, such binding vows spoken before the empire. And yet, beneath that exhaustion lingered a quieter anxiety, the uncertainty of what came next. This man was now his husband, and still they felt like strangers confined within the same space. Determined not to let the silence swallow him whole, Elias attempted small talk. He commented on the chapel's grandeur. He mentioned the king's presence and how rare it was for the monarch to attend any noble ceremony in person. He asked whether the journey to Blackwood territory would begin immediately or after a few days' rest. Adrian responded politely but briefly, a hum of acknowledgement, a nod, a short, measured reply that left little room for continuation. There was no sharpness in his tone, no impatience, only restraint. After several attempts, Elias felt the conversation wither in his hands like a flower cut too soon. Eventually, he fell quiet as well and turned his gaze toward the carriage window. The city passed by in soft blurs of color. Familiar streets he had walked, familiar rooftops he had seen since childhood. Merchants closing their stalls, children darting between alleyways, the fountain near the central square where he had once lingered with books tucked under his arm. He wondered how many more times he would look upon them. The carriage finally slowed. When they arrived at the Whitemore estate, the grandeur of the occasion revealed itself fully. Lord Whitemore, Elias's father, had spared no expense. The banquet had been arranged in their sprawling rose garden, where white canopies billowed gently in the afternoon breeze. Tables draped in ivory linen were adorned with crystal vases overflowing with fresh roses in shades of blush and cream. Golden candelabras caught the sunlight, casting warm glints across polished silverware and glass. Musicians played softly near the fountain, their melody light and celebratory, blending with the murmur of refined conversation. It was nothing short of perfection. Surely the noble circles would speak of this for the entire season. The wedding of the year, the alliance of House Whitemore and House Blackwood, beauty and power intertwined. Throughout the celebration, Elias and Adrian were swept into their roles without pause. Nobles approached in waves, offering congratulations, presenting gifts, engaging in polite yet probing conversations disguised as pleasantries. Political allies extended veiled assurances. Rivals masked curiosity behind courteous smiles. Elias smiled until his cheeks ached. He bowed when required, responded gracefully, thanked each guest with measured charm. Every movement was controlled, every word weighed. Adrian stood beside him when protocol demanded, commanding and composed, yet frequently pulled away by influential lords seeking private words. Discussions of borders, trade routes, military reinforcements. Hours passed in a blur of faces and formalities. And despite standing beneath the same canopy, despite sharing the same rings and the same newly forged title, Elias realized he had barely had a moment to truly look at his husband. They were bound. Yet all day they remained apart. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, the celebration gradually came to an end. One by one, the guests began taking their leave, their carriages lining up along the estate's grand driveway. Polite farewells echoed through the garden, silk skirts rustling against gravel paths, final congratulations exchanged beneath the fading light. Servants moved with renewed urgency now. Luggage was carefully loaded into waiting carriages, trunks filled with garments, dowry chests reinforced with iron locks, smaller cases containing personal effects. The grandeur of the wedding had ended. The journey was about to begin. Both Adrian and Elias had changed into their traveling attire, simpler, more comfortable garments suited for the long road ahead. Elias's robes were replaced with a fitted coat of soft cream and muted gold, practical yet still befitting his new status. The jewels were gone, the heavy ceremonial embroidery removed. Without the adornments, he felt strangely lighter, and yet heavier in other ways. Before stepping outside, Elias returned to his chamber one final time. The room was nearly empty now. The shelves where his belongings once rested stood bare, save for faint impressions in the dust. The curtains swayed gently with the evening breeze drifting through the half-open window. The bed where he had spent 18 years dreaming, fearing, surviving, now looked unfamiliar in its stillness. This space had once felt like confinement. Now it felt like something he was losing. He let his gaze linger, committing every detail to memory. The pattern of the wallpaper, the small crack near the corner of the ceiling, the way the light fell across the wooden floor. Then, quietly, he stepped out and gently shut the door behind him. The soft click echoed more loudly in his chest than in the corridor. Outside, waiting at the foot of the steps, stood his family. His mother maintained a dignified composure, though her eyes shimmered faintly. His father stood tall, hands clasped behind his back, pride and finality etched into his posture. His younger sister fidgeted nervously, while his older brother watched him with an unreadable expression. Elias approached them. He embraced them one by one. His father first, a firm, formal embrace accompanied by words of honor and expectation. His mother next, her touch lingering a fraction longer, though her voice remained steady. His brother brief, restrained. His sister soft and hesitant, her fingers clutching at his sleeve before letting go. It was affectionate. It was proper. It was expected. But it felt rehearsed, like a scene performed according to tradition rather than raw emotion. As he stepped back, he allowed himself a final glance toward the line of carriages waiting at the gates. There, at the very front, stood the Blackwood carriage, darker and more imposing than the rest. Through the open door, he caught sight of his husband. Adrian was already seated inside, posture composed, gaze directed forward. Even in stillness, he commanded presence. A steward approached Elias and opened the carriage door. He paused for a heartbeat. Then he stepped inside and sat beside the Duke. The space felt different now, closer, more deliberate. Moments later, the procession began to move. The mansion, his childhood home, grew smaller in the distance. And this time, the carriage carrying his husband did not lead ahead of him, carried them both forward. Oudiessi was the border city where Duke Blackwood was stationed. Far from the capital's glitter, far from familiarity, the carriage ride resumed before dawn, the sky still cloaked in deep indigo when they departed the outer territories of the capital. A thin mist clung to the earth, blurring the road ahead into something uncertain and endless. This time, Elias sat across from his husband. The words still felt foreign in his mind. Adrian was not much of a speaker. The journey stretched long, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against uneven roads filling the space between them. Silence accompanied them for most of it. Yet the silence was not hostile. Occasionally, Adrian would glance up from the documents resting in his lap and ask if Elias was comfortable, if the pace of travel was too fast, if he required rest before continuing. Practical questions. Measured, but never dismissive. And Elias began to notice something else. At every checkpoint along the border roads, Adrian addressed his soldiers by name. He listened when they spoke, even when their reports were brief or clumsily delivered. He thanked them, not grandly, not theatrically, but sincerely. When a young guard stumbled over his words while delivering a status update, Adrian did not reprimand him. He corrected him calmly, offered quiet clarification, and moved on without humiliation. Power without cruelty. Authority without degradation. Elias found himself watching, observing, reevaluating. This was not the cold tyrant whispered about in noble gossip circles. This was a commander, a protector, and perhaps a man burdened by expectation just as much as Elias was. By the third evening of travel, the terrain grew harsher. The paved roads gave way to rougher paths, stones jutting unevenly beneath the carriage wheels. The air carried a sharper chill. Oudiessi was still several days away. That night, they decided to stop at a well-known roadside tavern instead of camping outside. It was modest compared to imperial luxury, but clean and respectable. The wooden beams were sturdy, lanterns well kept, and the scent of warm stew drifted faintly through the entrance. Travelers murmured over mugs of ale. A fire crackled in the hearth. Adrian spoke briefly with the innkeeper and arranged accommodations. 2 rooms, separate. The decision was immediate and unquestioned. Elias had brought no attendants with him, despite his mother's subtle disapproval. He had claimed it was to lighten the journey. In truth, he simply felt safer alone. Safer without watchful eyes. Safer without whispers. When they reached the narrow hallway upstairs, Adrian paused before the doors. "You may rest," he said quietly. "We leave at sunrise." "Yes, Your Grace." The formal title slipped out instinctively. Adrian's gaze lingered on him. "You may call me Adrian," he said after a brief pause. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. Elias hesitated. Adrian. The name felt intimate in a way the marriage vows had not. A flicker of something unreadable crossed the Duke's eyes. "Lock your door," Adrian added. "The roads are not as secure as the capital." It sounded practical, but Elias heard the underlying concern. "I will." For a moment, neither moved. The corridor felt too narrow, too quiet. Their scents brushed faintly against one another. Restrained, cautious, curious. Then Adrian turned and entered his room without another word. Later that night, chaos stirred below. A crash, a shout. Hurried footsteps. Elias froze, every instinct alert. Before fear could take root, 3 measured knocks sounded at his door. Elias. He opened it to find Adrian fully dressed, hand near his sword. "Remain inside," Adrian said calmly. "There is a minor disturbance." "You're going down there alone?" "I am capable." "I know that," Elias said softly. "I meant, be careful." Something shifted in Adrian's gaze. "I will." Minutes later, it was over. Over-enthusiastic merchants arguing over coin. Adrian explained upon returning. "You were worried," he observed. "You are my husband." The word lingered between them, and I have seen enough men hurt each other over pride. Adrian leaned lightly against the doorframe. "I was raised on the border," he said. "There is little patience there for needless cruelty. You do not enjoy violence." "No," Adrian replied. "I endure it." "I do not enjoy being used as leverage," Elias admitted. "I know. Just acknowledgement. Nothing more." And somehow it was enough. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Elias." When Elias returned to his bed, the room did not feel so empty. And in the room beside his, Adrian stood in the quiet dark for a long moment before extinguishing his lantern. For the first time since the imperial decree had bound their names together, Neither of them felt entirely alone. That's it for today's video. Please like, share, and subscribe to support our channel. We'll be back with the next chapter soon. Thank you.